Well, essentially, there are 5 estates. You've got, the church, you've got, or the clergy for that matter, you've got the clergy, you've got the commoners, you've got the nobles, you've got the media, and then the social, cultural aspect of it. So these are 5 key estates in a society. So I want to take a keen look about 2, and that is on the clergy or religion and the state. How can these 2 particular institutions correlate in such a dynamic society where the politics of the day takes center stage, where the issues to do with the church of the day takes center stage? So I want to take a keen look into that, especially at a time when the president just recently received a report from the Presidential Task Force on Religious Institutions, and the bill is called the Religious Organizations Bill of 2024. So they're amongst a lot of proposals in it, because it's just a bill, not a law yet. And some of the things it proposes is that any person found to be at the center of false miracles will face up to about 10 years imprisonment or a 5 million shillings fine, or both. If one person is found coercing another to join a religion in an extreme way, they're eligible for a fine of up to 1 million shillings or 3 years jail. Anyone that threatens the safety of another person in a church institution will face up to 20 years imprisonment or 5 million shillings fine. And then, of course, the big debate on the fresh registration of all religious institutions plus the religious person, or at least if you call yourself a clergy. And this will require that you have to give proof of theological training, got to give physical address of your church. Your church needs to have at least 50 members, as well as your church needs to have at least a third of the members who are Kenyan citizens. There's also the aspect of foreign churches in the country as well. So I want to take a dive into this particular conversation, but the best way to start before I introduce my guest is just listening to President William Ruto, who says he's also passionate about religion, because remember, this is a God-given government, and 2 of the key persons in the government, including the First Lady and the Second Lady, are Christians. So let's listen in to what President William Ruto said first before we can come back.
This report is very important to us as a nation. It is very important to me as a leader who values religion. And therefore, we will be taking the next steps in making sure that the good work you have done so far translates into what will do 2 very important things for us. Number 1 is to protect our freedom of religion in Kenya, to make sure that we safeguard the place of religion in our country, and to also make sure that that freedom is accompanied by protection from those who want to abuse religion for other reasons.
All right, so I'm joined by Pastor Alan Kefa in studio this evening. Thank you very much, Pastor Alan, for making time, and karibu sana.
Asante, thanks for having me.
All right, so we'll just kick it off on church is considered as the first estate. How critical is that of a statement? Does that mean it supersedes all other estates? What does that mean?
Essentially, in our constitution, we have not gotten past even the preamble of the constitution, because there are arguments that pull in different directions. You will hear an argument for this government being a secular government, but then everything else after that points to more or less based on the foundation of the Christian faith, including even our national anthem. And so that then would make a case for this being a relatively Christian state, so to speak. And that, with that in mind, then the church being the first estate, then you can argue out from that perspective.
Yes.
However, when it comes now to the conversation about the bill, because that's really the gist of our conversation today, I'm conflicted for one reason. One, the church being the first estate, it is based on an assumption that the church should more or less be the moral voice, the moral compass of the society. And so then it becomes difficult when the picture you get is you'd better style up or else, you know. And so that becomes a very dicey scenario in a sense, being the moral compass, but within certain parameters. Then I suspect then that even removes, you know, that first estate status. It's almost like power without authority, so to speak. And then you come to the constitution, because the government operates from the constitutional, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but it's out there, you know. Is it just what this commission has come up with, or is it anchored in law? And if it is anchored in law, this is a good opportunity for the Christian lawyers to come up and actually give an interpretation of that bill, because there are certain freedoms within the Constitution that this proposed bill is in direct conflict with. We have a freedom of association. We have a freedom of religion. We have a freedom, even there's the Information Act and all that. All these are freedoms that just that position seems to be putting itself on a collision course. I mean, the kind of civil action that can come out of that, if it is institution, I don't even know if we have the energy or the time, because it's such a I'm not sure it's very, very well thought through, because freedom of religion, in this nation, we purport to say that we have a freedom of religion and association. And again, of course, I'm alive to the fact that my freedom ends where somebody else's freedom starts. And that is an argument both ways. Where, how then do you... it's a very difficult thing to fly if you begin to put it from a legal platform. Then the third thing that I pick from your introduction is why is it that it's just the Christian faith that is on the spotlight? Because then what happens to the other faiths that are not necessarily overt in their operations, because it's probably the Christian faith that is on TV and all that, and we see a lot of that, and because of the population, does that mean that the other faiths are above board in what they're doing? Has somebody gone there? I don't know if the commission went to the other faiths and they collected information from that, because if that did not happen, then you see already another very, big question mark on the whole bill. So I don't know about those things.
Many may argue it's due to the cases that have been reported and recorded of quote-unquote cults, like behaviors or extremisms as well. For instance, we are having this conversation now because this particular task force was put up in place to look into the Shakahola massacre and over 400 bodies that were recovered.
We had a series of conversations, and I remember actually I was even in the Bible Theology show here, and we talked about that. And why do we assume that cults are Christian? Because a cult is not a Christian organization. That's why it's called a cult, And so we can't. The Christian faith should not carry the weight, or should not carry the effect of a cultic organization. That purporting to be a Christian doesn't make that a Christian organization. The same way having a Christian name doesn't make you Christian. So we should go to where the rain began beating us. We shouldn't. For me, what I'm picking up, and I God forbid that I'm looking like I'm mounting a defense. I would really want to be very objective in my feedback, because I also have my issues in some of the things. But are we treating symptoms, or are we treating the problem? Because if it is a legal problem, then it shouldn't be targeted at, for lack of a better term, because we are responding to what came out of the report. For lack of a better term, then let it be across board that everybody is being deregistered and everybody is being registered. Then there seems to be fairness in that, because the fact that we have not seen drama in other places doesn't mean it's not happening. You know, and we will never know. And again, I can tell you for free, there are some very well-meaning, well-intentioned ministers who may not necessarily meet that threshold. What happens to them? Because again, remember, we have freedom of religion in this nation. So what happens to that religious organization that probably, like there are some certain sects of the Christian faith. If you look at world religions, African tradition religion is accepted as a religion.
Yes.
And some part of the African tradition religion actually stem in a sense from the Christian faith, part of it, because of the missionaries and all that. Actually, African tradition religion came up as a response to the missionaries when they came, and there were things that Africans felt they were losing, and you know, all that. And so part of their formation does not include theological training. And I'll tell you for free, theological training does not make one a pastor. So you will get somebody who is trained theologically. It's the same as somebody who's gone to when I was in high school, we had Muslims who took CRE because they could get good grades in CRE, and people from other religions. So if we put it on the basis that theological training is what makes one a minister, then already it's a sin of inception, because then we will have all sorts of people out there. You know, I find it interesting that the problem we are seeing in the church, you will find it within the law society. There are very interesting lawyers. You will find it within the medical profession. There are some very interesting medics. And so let's not throw out the baby with the water. What have we done with other institutions?
Right.
What can we learn from that? The world we are in, the world right now, knowledge management is such a key part of decision making. What knowledge do we have? How have we been able to, in as much as there are some rogue lawyers and rogue doctors, and which is even more, for me, if you ask me, quite dangerous. How have we been able to regulate that? What lessons have we picked? Has that worked?
Right. If I could cut you short, Percy, it's interesting your school of thought, because on the fresh registration of all religious institutions, one of the requirements will be that you should be able to provide proof of theological training. And so with that explanation, and at least the example you've given as well, is this to mean that even if this was to be the case, where every particular religious institution is able to provide proof of theological training, it may not really be able to tame, other quote-unquote unchristian behaviors that may, or unchristian persons that may be able to crop up as well?
A rogue is a rogue, trained or not trained, because it's not an education issue; it's a heart issue. This is not a legal issue; it's a moral issue. And the more we try to solve a moral issue within a legal framework, the more we get ourselves into trouble. Because what we'll end up with the people who look for jobs. So somebody will go to theological school, train as a pastor, get employed as a pastor, and you will not have pastoral work. You'll have a businessman, and so there's a very thin line between the moral angle of it, and unfortunately you can't measure spiritualism. There is a spiritual angle to it, and before it even becomes a legal issue. So the legal framework should not be the overarching, guideline. We should have legal parameters, because again, we don't want people dying. We don't want people getting into those spaces. However, let us recognize that this is not purely a legal issue, and we can't have a blanket guideline that says if you are not this, you are not that.
Right.
It's not black and white. There are too many gray areas, and if we could provide parameters, if we could. There has always been regulation within the Christian faith. There are certain things personally I can't do, not because of anything else, but because of the affiliations I'm part of, because of the networks I'm part of. I may not even be allowed to go. If I say a crazy thing in this program, I will not have reached the door before a few people call me, because my friends call me, and so there's already a framework that is not overt, but it is there. And so I shiver at the thought of anybody who's traveled a bit where these regulations were there will tell you. The West is quite an interesting place to go because of such regulations, because that is you in effect just cut off what was actually making the society work.
All right, I'll bring in the aspect of the state, because often than not we've seen, not just with this year, but way back from the 1990s all the way to 2014s and so forth, where the state has tried to really be, the institution that pushes for the regulation of churches. And not a lot of people have really understood what that term actually means. What does it mean to regulate a church? So we'll start from that point on what it means to regulate a church. When the state says we want all churches regulated, what it means, and the aspect of just how much can the state really encroach into the churches, if that's the right time to use, or at least how much can they be aware of what is happening within the religious sector, but to also have that to try and withhold themselves, as well as interfering too much with what the religious institutions are doing.
What I can give credit to the government for is actually the boldness to say there's something wrong here. Because previous governments have been, running around that and not coming out and saying this is not working. So for me, that for me is a plus on the government side. Just saying, guys, stop, this is not working. However, we need to go back and ask ourselves, where did the rain begin beating us? Where did we begin getting it wrong? Because until now, it was actually the other way around. The state would want to, the government of the day would want to be cozy with the church, because there is what the church was doing. That's why, again, in our laws, you will notice, for example, in devolved government, I think there is no committee, quote unquote, that doesn't have a slot for a religious leader. The CDF board, school boards, and all that. So already there is a recognition by state that there is such an important role that the religious institutions play, such that just coming back and saying stop, unplug everything. It sort of ends up shooting ourselves in the foot in a sense, because we will create a vacuum, and life doesn't like vacuum. Somebody else will take that role. We'd better be careful that it is not somebody who will make our situation worse than what it was before. There are nations that were Christian nations that are not anymore. There are nations that were secular nations, but they are no longer secular. That vacuum has caused other religious organizations to come up and just occupy the vacuum that was there. Like I said previously, and I maintain that is where we need to channel our energy. This is not a legal issue.
Yeah, it's a moral
Bottom
issue.
line, it is a moral, spiritual,
Are we
issue.
able to control that, the moral aspect of it? the spiritual
Unfortunately,
aspect of it?
unfortunately, there are very different. There are very few metrics for that, and so we must go back and say and say interrogate. And it's great to have trained ministers, but I wouldn't sit under a minister who is not trained in the first place. It's great to have people who are trained. It's great to have people who have received a certain level of schooling. However, maybe what we need to be asking ourselves, are there bodies that religious leaders belong to? Then those bodies are the ones who should be put on the spotlight. Are they registered? Are they part of the things I do as a minister? There's work I do on behalf of the government.
Yeah.
When I join couples on a wedding, there's no church that produces wedding certificates. That's a legal thing. When I bury people, I don't bury it on behalf of the church. I bury it because it's a legal thing. You have to have a burial permit and all that. And so we need to recognize that there's a domino effect of what the church is doing that is not out there, that we don't want to throw away that because 1 or 2 or 5 or 10. We need to even look at the TV stations that air those things. What is and they have their freedoms, they have paid for their airtime and all that. Do they have guidelines, for example, that somebody will stand on TV and fabricate a miracle and it's aired and they ask for money and nobody is following that? So we may even begin asking ourselves, should we start there, and ask, can we regulate some things that we see and we feel that are not, above board? Small baby steps like that we can be able to manage, but a blanket law would actually have a negative effect.
Right. So I want to bring in one more aspect as well. On this particular bill, there's also the proposal to bar politics from religious institutions, or barring actually religious institutions from engaging in politics. And if any person is found engaging in politics in a religious institution as a religious leader, they're eligible for a fine of 500,000 shillings or a 6-month imprisonment. And the issue of politics in the church has been such a now common debate, particularly with the run-up to the elections, the previous elections, to this particular point. And what we saw is outright backlash to the churches, especially after, they're not able to really put out their voice out there in terms of critiquing some of the decisions that the government has made. And the view was a lot of people do not trust churches anymore previously. And so does this help restore the faith back fully on that this is a holy place, this is a sanctified place, no politics on this particular altar?
It still goes back to, that's a very ridiculous law, because am I not a Kenyan? Don't I have a voting card? So are we suggesting that religious leaders should not? What do you mean by participating in politics?
The particular altar, we've seen political leaders who've used church altars to politic.
That's wrong, and I wouldn't even advocate for it. But what is stated in that document is that the religious leaders are not allowed to participate in politics, and I'm wondering, okay, so are they not allowed to lend their voice to
have an opinion on
what is important to? Because from the minute that gentleman leaves the pulpit, he's going home to a wife and children, and he wants a good road and a good school for his children, and people of good character in government. He's not supposed to talk about that. That's why I said there are so many other freedoms within our constitution that would poke a million holes in this bill as it is, where we are saying, how about the rights of this individual as a Kenyan and not as a religious leader? are we going to infringe on all his other rights? Because we must be seen to be acting within the law and within the spirit of the law, even as we implement law. And for me, I want good governance. Because there's a scripture that says, pray for the peace of the nation where you are, for in the nation's peace you will find peace. So if I'm not actively participating in getting good leadership into office, I'm being asked to take a back seat so that a bad leader gets into office. I don't think that would work. What we need are guidelines and frameworks that says, let us separate in a way that it is wrong for me to invite a political leader in the church where I'm a pastor, for the simple reason that not every member believes in the way that I do, you know, and so I will not do that. But there's a guideline with the former president, the second president of this nation, President Daniel Arap Moi, the late. He used to go to church regularly, but you'd never find him at the pulpit. He would stand outside the church, and people would have the freedom to leave if you want to leave. But if you want to stay and listen to him, well and good, listen to him. So that be the way forward. You see, that doesn't take away the freedoms from the church. And anybody who wants to come to speak, then they should be allowed to come and speak, as opposed to saying nobody speaks yet. This is a gathered group of people that if we don't give them information, they will vote badly. You know, I was part of a religious institution where what we did, we didn't invite anybody to come and give their opinion. What we did, we brought all of them and allowed them to have very robust debates in the church. That is helpful, because if there are 5 candidates, let's have all of them here and create time for them in a session where it's not the service. We say we have a big facility. Why don't we, and we have gathered here 500 or a number of people, let them come here, let them discuss. And actually in those seasons, what we normally used to do, we would have registration at the entrance. So at the end of the day, what we had was, we had more people registered, we had more people getting information, we had people having an opportunity to interact with their leaders in a way that somebody else was not doing it. Because the debates we see on TV, they are choreographed, they are scripted. But hey, these are guys who have come and they're talking about their issues, and somebody can be able to ask a question if they need to. And we also create an opportunity for them to register as voters. So you see, already just by that example I've given you, one, there's civic education, there's voter registration, and as a religious leader, I have played my role in participating in the politics. So like I said, whatever we do, let us not be guided by what the rogue people did. Let us be guided by reason, by the law, and by what would work for everyone.
Right. So I'd love us to wrap this conversation up because we're out of time. So I'll give you an opportunity to wrap it up from your end. Now, from this point onwards, if at all this bill comes into play, and you know, obviously the other institutions like the parliament who, you know, are at the center of voting for this particular bill, and it goes in some of these recommendations which church leaders may have dissenting voices upon. So from this point onwards, how should they now be able to let the state know what they feel should be done, what they feel should not be done, so that let there not be a rift between the church and the state. Let it be, you know, like a harmony.
Let me speak like a businessman. Competition doesn't work. And if you look at the models or the business models that are out there, there is a blue ocean model, where it simply says when you fish at the shore, there's a lot of competition, the water is dirty, and there's no fish. But when you go into the deep ocean, which is blue in color, that's why the blue ocean analogy comes from. What you will find there will be a lot of fish, the water is deep, and very little competition. And at that level, there's collaboration and not competition. And because these are different sectors of society that people trust and look up to, both government, politics, and any other estate, what would work would be collaboration, where we are saying, what is the one thing that unifies us, that as we pursue that, it would actually help us subsume and overcome what does not unify us. If the government would take time and use religious institutions to, for example, get these guys who are doing criminal things by killing people and all that, by now they would have actually gotten rid of the problem. Because you've heard of the adage, send a thief to catch a thief. You will be able to get more ground with that, as opposed to just coming at religious leaders. And and there are some good religious leaders out there. And the reason why they are crazy religious leaders is actually because they are good religious leaders. You cannot have a fake if you don't have an original. And so let us not beat up the original because the fake is making too much noise. In fact, I would surprise you, bad news sells faster. So I without fear of contradiction, I can tell you there are more good religious leaders than there are rotten apples. And it is in every sphere of society. It is in every estate that you will find some rotten apples.
Be it media, be it political, be it the church, right? All right, so thank you very much, Pastor Allen Kefa, for coming in this, I almost said morning, I missed morning, but this evening, just to shed more light on the relation between the religion and the state, especially at a time where the Religious Organizations Bill of 2024 is expected in Parliament. This is after the Presidential Task Force on Religious Organizers were able to just sit down, compile a report. They did a lot of visits in various counties before they're able to table this. And so it will be interesting to see how this shapes the conversation for the churches, for the states, for the society in all, or in general, from this point onward. So thank you for watching Christian World today. My name is Cynthia Nanjala. Have yourself a blessed evening and a great start to this particular week.